Welcome to the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller-Merrill, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
Welcome to the Workology Podcast, sponsored by Upskill HR and Ace the HR Exam. Today's podcast is part of a series on the Workology Podcast focused on the roles and responsibilities of the Chief Human Resources Officer, also known as the CHRO, also known as the VP of Talent and Culture or Chief People Officer. This is an executive level role that deals with managing human resources, as with organizational development and implementing policies of change to help improve the overall efficiency of the company. Sometimes these policies include diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'd like them to be all the time. We need more DEI in our lives. Today, I'm joined by Whitney Bennett. She's the VP of Talent and Culture at CallRail. With a decade of experience in human resources, Whitney is passionate about fostering a diverse and inclusive culture where people are excited about the work they do and the teams they are working with. Whitney, welcome to the Workology Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's talk about your background. You've been in HR at the management level for almost 10 years. How has your roles evolved over time into the VP of Talent and Culture with CallRail?
Yeah, so I have always been in a startup environment. I think it's a really great way to grow and kind of try a bunch of different hats and figure out what you like. I was in a company in an admin role and they didn't have any HR. We were about 50 people. I saw a need. I asked if I could do it and they said, sure. So I got certified with my PHR and I joined SHRM. And from there was promoted to HR manager, then HR director. And I left that company and moved over to CallRail to be an HR director. And about a year in, I was promoted at CallRail to the VP of Talent and Culture.
So I wanted to ask you too about skills and experiences. We talked a little bit about the CHRO role, your journey stepping into a chief human resources officer type role, but I wanted to ask you about absolute requirements for the CHRO role, thinking about maybe somebody who's just starting out or is looking for kind of their checklist of skills and experiences that they need for the future to step into that CHRO position.
Sure. I think adaptability and empathy, honestly, are some of the most important requirements. I think HR in media has kind of been made into this caricature of this person who just makes everything hard and is the police and loves policies and documentation. And I love a good policy and I love documentation, but you've got to be able to see the person behind all of it. And I think if 2020 taught us anything, we've got to be adaptable and we can't be married to any one thing. We have to be able to change quickly.
I love that. And I feel like we're kind of in this situation right now, like in flux, right? Where we are a year into the pandemic, we continue to have to be flexible. We don't know what's going to happen in 60 days, 90 days, 6 months, a year and a half. Not that we knew all of that before. I mean, it's just more real now because everything's been turned upside down.
Yes, I thought I was going to be home for 2 weeks. That was a year ago. It's been the longest 2 weeks of my life. So we've got to be able to change things around and kind of meet people where they are, especially during this year where I think mental wellness was really kind of suffering for people.
How does the CHRO role change how company leadership works with HR or vice versa?
So I'm a big believer that the way the rest of the leadership team interacts with the head of HR will inform how the rest of the company perceives the HR team as a whole. When it's done well, I think HR can be a really excellent partner for the leadership team and help them navigate the challenges of a growing business. They can make sure that people are thought of with all the decisions, because a lot of people are just thinking about the business. They're not thinking of the human aspect of it. And if it doesn't go that way, it's typically a lot of cleanup for managers and honestly HR if you don't approach decisions kind of holistically.
Absolutely. So everything's crazy. We're all in flux. Tell us about CallRail's shift to remote working. What does that look like for you guys? And then what has been the biggest challenge?
Yeah. So, like I said, we thought we would be home for 2 weeks. Our CEO wanted to say 4 weeks in the email he was sending out to the company. And I was like, no, you can't do that. It will scare people. So, clearly, HR people are fallible as well, because I was super wrong about that. We really leaned into the aspect of working remotely and focusing on mental health. We had employees that were completely overwhelmed, some that were sheltering in place alone, and we wanted to make sure they had everything they needed to make their home office comfortable. So we introduced a home office stipend. We also continually reminded people about our EAP. My team would just randomly pick people to check in with. We made sure that people knew it was okay to step away and take a minute. And we also hosted several virtual events throughout the year so we could still kind of get that engagement and camaraderie with people. And then as far as challenges for me, I would say I am not someone who loves working from home. I like to have kind of those drive-by interactions with people. I feel like that's how I keep my pulse on the organization and what's happening. So I've really had to adapt to building kind of breaks in my schedule just to randomly check in on people and not have people be scared that HR is randomly checking in on them. Nothing is wrong, just want to see how things are going.
Isn't that weird? But I love that you're doing that. A quick story. So in one of my last corporate HR roles, it was new and I'm a social person. I like to walk the floor and meet people. Like that's like you, incredibly important to me. And so it was like my first or second day in this new job. And I walked onto the call center floor where we had a big group of people for inside sales. And I started talking to one of the managers and introduced myself to all the people and just chatted it up as I do. And it felt a little weird, but I was just nice. And then I went back to my office and, got ready to leave for the rest of the day. And I found out after I got to know this manager, it had been, I don't know, 3 or 4 months. He informed me that the only time that they saw HR ever was when they were handing them a box to be.
No!
So the fact that I walked up and talked to the manager first and then started just chatting with everybody caused this huge amount of panic and stress. And then he felt comfortable to tell me after he realized like, that's not the kind of HR person I am, but I just can't imagine ever being that kind of HR person, like ick.
No, and also don't ever just hand anyone a box, like be a person. That's awful.
Yeah.
No.
So I love that you're making time for it. And I do think it's important, like, just even if it's like a quick Slack chat or a Teams chat or hopping on to like a manager's meeting real quick just to say hi. These are all little things that we can do that don't cost any money, just a little bit of time on our calendar.
For sure. And I think to your point, I super clarify when I put time on people's calendar. Nothing is wrong. I just want to talk to you and check in and see how you're doing. Everything's okay. You still have a job. Because I think especially during a pandemic, it was like, oh, why are they talking to me?
Yeah, and I just read a tweet from somebody from Huffington Post. They riffed a group of employees and they invited them all to a Zoom meeting. And like the password to get in the Zoom meeting is like spring is sprung. And then everybody who got invited to the meeting got riffed. So that's not the kind of experience that we want, but this is the kind of stuff that gets shared in the media. It, was all over the news, tweeted on Twitter, and then everybody thinks that HR folks are bad people. And this is the thing that we like to do.
I feel like probably no one asked that HR person if it was a good idea to do it that way. I would hope not.
I would think no, that they didn't, that it's somebody else made the decision and wasn't thinking about how people would feel, the kind of eyebrows it might raise, stress it would cause. And they're not thinking about what it's like for you and me who are going back to our organizations and we pop into a meeting and everybody is like, holy cow, what's happening? HR's here.
Yeah, it's really hard to come back from those and not be seen as the police when all we really want to do is partner with everyone to make the organization great.
Let's take a reset. This is Jessica Miller Merrill, and you are listening to the Workology podcast sponsored by Upskill HR and ACE the HR exam. We're talking about the role of the CHRO and how DEI interplays with that with our guest, Whitney Bennett. Personal and professional development is essential for successful HR leaders. Join Upskill HR to access live training, community, and over 100 on-demand courses for the dynamic leader. HR Research credits available. Visit upskillhr.com for more. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about diversity and inclusion. It's top of mind right now, and I'm so happy that it is. I wanted to ask you about some of the things that you're doing in your work in creating and implementing D&I initiatives with CallRail.
Yeah, so diversity, equity, and inclusion was something we had started leaning into in late 2019. We had committed to everyone in our org that they would go through a Think Inclusively course, and we would kind of build on that. We got through maybe 2 or 3 rounds of employees, and then the pandemic happened. So we put everything on pause because we thought we would be back in no time. I thought we were only going to be gone for 2 weeks. And then the social justice movements of the summer started, and we knew we just couldn't wait any longer. So we're fortunate at CallRail that we already had a great culture manager in place. I think that, along with the fact that we were already working on DE&I, gave us a great foundation to build on. We really leaned into being an anti-racist organization kind of right away. And I think maybe we went too fast at first and really overwhelmed people, I think, in a time that was already really mentally heavy and possibly didn't have necessarily a clear direction. So we leaned into listening to our employees. We got some feedback. And now in 2021, we really honed in on creating a foundation of psychological safety. And once we feel like we're good there, then we'll continue to kind of build and expand on that foundation.
I love that you guys have a lot of self-awareness of what your employees and the organization, like what's their comfort level?
Yeah, it's hard. And we're a very introverted organization, and we were putting people in group settings and asking them to talk about really loaded subjects. And I think we just needed to pull back a little bit and get people to the safe place where they felt like it was okay to have those more public conversations with each other.
Can you talk a little bit more about the concept of psychological safety in the context of maybe your Black employees, as well as maybe other either protected groups or just groups of employees who were just not feeling safe yet to have these conversations?
So I think kind of everyone knows the benefits of having a diverse workforce. A variety of perspectives leads to a variety of different ideas. There's increased productivity and increased creativity. However, I don't think you can really reap the benefits if your employees don't feel safe in voicing their opinions and sharing the ideas. And it was clear this summer, after the murders of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and the resulting social justice movements, that our Black employees were hurting. And we wanted to make sure CallRail was not adding to that hurt. And I think something that was really eye-opening for our organization, we're a Slack organization, and obviously we use that a ton more now that we're in the pandemic and all remote. One of our Black employees just said, here's my experience, and here's how I've interacted with the police, or here's how I feel like in the workplace I've been discriminated against, not necessarily at CallRail, just in life. And I think it really led to a lot of eye-opening for our white employees, and then for our Black employees, that helped make them feel safe, because there was a lot of back and forth on Slack about different experiences. And we really want to build an organization where people feel comfortable bringing themselves as they are to work and speaking up and disagreeing with people. And you can't do that if you don't have psychological safety. And I think, as an organization, we don't always get it right. I posted a blog in our company blog that's just internal, probably right after the murder of George Floyd, and I maybe said like a one line about our Black employees are going through something right now that we could never imagine. And people kind of came to me and were like, you need to name what we're going through. Like, don't lump it in with everything else everyone else is going through. So I made that mistake and I haven't made it again. But I think being able to make mistakes and kind of grow, we continue to lean into that. And I think that's really important for our Black employees and our other minority employees to feel safe that we continue to try.
What an amazing gift that your Black employees gave others at your organization to be open and sharing exactly how they're experiencing. It makes me a little bit emotional because they do not have to, and they should not have to, but
No.
The fact that they were willing to, I think says a lot about the culture at your company, which is, fantastic. So, I just love it. It's, they didn't have to do that.
No, and it was extremely moving. And I think our culture manager, who is also Black and has been with us for, 4 or 5 years, right after everything happened, she actually sent an email to the whole company and was like, here's my calendar, here's my schedule. Anyone that wants to talk to me about what's going on in the news right now, or my experience, or why this is a problem, like, please put time on my calendar. And I think some people would say, okay, well, that's her job. She's the culture manager. It's not her job at all. No one asked her to do that. And I think the mental burden of going through everything that was happening, but then offering herself to the organization. We just have so many people, I think, trying to get it right at CallRail. And that's something I really appreciate about the people that, I'm surrounded with.
One of the other things I wanted to make sure that we talked about today was employee resource groups and the ERG programs that you guys have. Can you kind of walk us through employee resource groups, how they work at CallRail, and then any changes that you guys have made as of recent? It could be related to the pandemic, could be related to just the Black Lives Matter movement. But I think a lot of people are searching for conversations like this podcast and trying to find out what are others doing, because we're really remote. We're not going to conferences right now. So I want to hear from you about what you guys are doing and what's changed.
Yeah, so we have 2 really engaging employee resource groups at CallRail. We're about 200 employees. So I think 2 groups feels right now. We have a women's circle, and then we have a Black and brown group. Our culture manager did a great job of solidifying these groups, but I think something that really makes employee resource groups work is group leaders and employees who want to be involved and who have a passion for kind of what they're bringing to the organization. Our ERGs have really focused on educating employees about different cultures. We obviously just had Black History Month in February, and our Black and Brown group hosted several sessions about celebrating triumphs of Black people and amazing things that have come out of their communities. Because I think so often we are focused on the struggles of minority and the struggles of Black people. And they were like, no, we've done amazing things. Let us educate you on that. And in 2021, the leadership team engaged more with the ERGs, which is something that's, I think, really important as well. None of our ERG leaders were managers, so they were missing out on a lot of the business things that were happening that would help inform kind of the direction of ERGs. So now they both have executive sponsors and also meet quarterly with myself, with the CEO and the CFO. I really think it helps tremendously to be able to partner with various groups to help with messaging, education, and overall engagement. And I would love to take all the credit, but honestly, it's our culture managers, it's the super involved employees. They are putting themselves out there and being really vulnerable. And I had a meeting with them asking them, how much time do you think you can commit to this? Because you're doing this on a voluntary basis. And they told us, 2 hours a week is what we need. And so I went to the managers and said, are you comfortable with them taking this out of their regular schedule? And they all were. So I think it's also important that they get the time and the space to do it within their regular schedule because they are adding so much value to the organization.
I just want to call out that and repeat what you said, that the ERGs have executive sponsors. And I think that is key, but there isn't a manager who's leading the ERG. It's employee driven, but they have the support of somebody on that executive leadership team. That's amazing.
Yes. And I think honestly, that was our miss in the beginning when the ERGs were originally set up. It was all employee led, and leadership didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know what leadership were doing. And now it's kind of, what do you think you can help us with? How can I help you? And it's made it so much more impactful, I think.
Another question I wanted to ask you, in recruiting and hiring and screening and so on, what do you think the first step is if you would recommend an HR leader to maybe help eliminate some of the bias that's happening in the hiring process?
Make sure you have someone that oversees the process for all departments. So in our case, we have an internal recruiter, and make sure every candidate goes through the same process. If engineer A takes a test before meeting with the hiring team, then engineer B should as well. You can't ever fast track someone just because they are a referral. Because also in your organization, if you feel like you have a diversity problem and you look around and you see a bunch of white people, you're probably going to get referred a bunch more white people. So you need to make sure that you're not just fast tracking those referrals. Also, you should be asking really similar questions to the candidates. And while I believe everyone does hire the best person for the job based on the candidates given, I think people really need to look at the pipeline and see if they're happy with what's coming in. And if not, really work on expanding your efforts with getting the word out about hiring, and post on a lot of different job boards. Don't just post on LinkedIn and then kind of walk away from it.
This is such great information. And I feel like you're giving us culture. We got the ERGs. Now we have recruiting and hiring. It kind of, it's not just one program for one thing. It is a holistic approach really that one needs to take to diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, and I think that's what I really appreciate about CallRail calling it talent and culture. It's not just human resources. They really are concerned about the full employee experience. And even if somebody doesn't stay at CallRail forever, we really want to create a community of supporters for CallRail internally and externally.
I love that. And I thank you so much for willing to take the time to chat with us today on the podcast. Where can people go to learn more about you and then the work that you guys are doing on your HR team with CallRail?
We have a great website, callrail.com. Careers are there. Our blogs are there. We have some excellent videos. And then people can find me on LinkedIn at Whitney Bennett.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Whitney. I really appreciate you chatting with us today.
Thanks, Jessica.
Are you loving the Workology podcast? Our Workology community reaches over 600,000 HR leaders every single month. Want to be a sponsor? Reach out to us at workology.com/advertising. It's really interesting to delve into how a role of the CHRO whose experience more closely connects them to the strategy and operations of the overall business. I love this. I love how the CHRO is working with company leadership, especially around diversity and inclusion and those business partnerships. I appreciate Whitney taking the time to share her knowledge and experience with us today on this podcast. And thank you for joining the Workology podcast, sponsored by Upskill HR and Ace the HR Exam. This podcast is for the disruptive workplace leader who is tired of the status quo. I know that's you. This is Jessica Miller Merrill. Until next time, you can visit workology.com to listen to all our previous podcast episodes.